I am thrilled to welcome, like I said, back Jesse. Jesse, I think I might not pronounce your last name properly. I forgot to ask you. Hagopian. He
That's
can
right.
correct me if I'm wrong. Has been an educator for over 20 years and has taught for over a decade. He is the recipient of the 2019 Racial Justice Teacher of the Year from the NAACP Youth Coalition and Social Justice Teacher of the Year award from Seattle Public Schools. He received the 2012 Abe Keller Foundation Award for Excellence and Innovation in Peace Education and the 2013 Secondary School Teacher of the Year Award and the Special Achievement Courageous Leadership Award from the Academy of Education, Arts, and Sciences. He is also the editor and co-editor of many books focusing on race, education, social justice, and his new book, which I have here, is Teach Truth, The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education. So we're going to get you a link if you're interested in reading this. His commentary has also been heard on local and national news programs like PBS, CNN, CBS, and many, many more. So I will drop the full length bio so you guys can all peruse his many accomplishments, but I'm going to spotlight Jesse, and I know you have a presentation to start.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie, for that warm welcome. It's really an honor to be invited to speak with you all today about my new book, Teach Truth, The Struggle for Anti-Racist Education. And I want to begin by thanking Red Wine and Blue, not just for hosting this conversation, but really for building a network of parents and community members who are standing up for public education and against this rising tide of book bans and curriculum censorship, really a disinformation campaign. And special thanks to the Julies. You all have been so kind and welcoming and just relentless in your work. And it's deeply appreciated. Educators deeply appreciate the support you all are giving. And to be honest, I wish this book that I wrote wasn't so timely. It would be fine with me if it didn't sell very many copies because it wasn't relevant anymore. But unfortunately, today is the 100th day of Trump being in office. It is 100 days of an intensified campaign to dismantle education. In the first 100 days, we've seen a barrage of executive orders aimed at defunding and abolishing the Department of Education, stripping civil rights protections, punishing any school that dares to ask uh, hard questions about the history of this country. Trump wants to defund any school that teaches honestly about race, about gender, about sexuality, about any aspect of U.S. history. And he's greenlit an all out assault on truth that targets teachers and librarians and children's books. And they've also coupled this attack with their attack on immigrants, on LGBTQ plus students, indigenous sovereignty, black communities, all while funneling money into private for profit schools. And this is not just about education, it's really about power. It's about whose stories are allowed to be told and who's allowed to belong in our communities. And I argue in the book Teach Truth that what's happening in our classrooms is not separate from what's happening in the broader struggles for social justice. And in fact, our classrooms are the front lines of that broader struggle. And, you know, I want to actually underscore that point with something that the philosopher Jason Stanley explained when he put it plainly in his new book called Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. And he said fascist education works by strategically erasing accounts of history and current events that include diversity of perspectives, narrowing the scope of what can be taught until students are presented with a single viewpoint, which is formulated specifically to justify and perpetuate a hierarchy of value between groups. Right? That's what's going on. today. And so I want to talk today about what it means to resist, what it means to resist this rising fascism, not just by rejecting their lies, but by fiercely committing ourselves to the work of truth telling and truth teaching and organizing for justice. So I want to lift up the educators, the students, the caregivers, the parents, the families who are fighting back. And I want to share how my book, Teach Truth, is both a warning, but also a call to action. And I want to begin with the story of how I wrote this book. I began organizing with the Zen Education Project, and we saw these proliferation of laws banning honest accounts of history, and we knew we had to act. And so we began organizing the first annual Teach Truth Day of Action in 2021. And when I saw the eruption of struggle of communities all over the country demanding to be able to teach the truth, I decided I needed to tell that story. And so I began writing the book. And within just a week or so of me beginning to research and write the book, Teach Truth, my dad told me he had some really important information that he needed to tell me. And he called me up, and I was excited to hear what he said. And what he told me forever changed my life and our family's lives, because he discovered the plantation that our family was enslaved on, the Lenoir plantation in Morgantown, Mississippi, Marion County. And it was incredible to finally, after years of studying slavery and studying how it's taught and how it's remembered and how it's misremembered, to have this direct understanding of where and how our family was enslaved. And, my great great grandfather, Thomas Lenoir, was born on that plantation. And after the Civil War, he married my great great grandmother, Laura Lenoir, who was born in 1844 and died the same year my father was born in 1948. And I want to actually just show you a slide um, to let you know who my great great grandmother was. All right, excellent. So here is my great great grandmother, Laura Lenoir. And she had 15 children. And one of those children was York Alonzo, my great grandfather, who was able to go to college, the first generation out of slavery, and became a teacher and a principal himself, building schools for Black children around the South. We're we're so proud of the work that Laura and um, York Alonzo did. And we immediately knew we had to get down to the plantation and experience that land for ourselves and try to make a connection with our ancestors that lived there. And so we bought a plane ticket to go down, me and my dad. And then the Delta variant of COVID surged and we had to cancel. And then my dad had a stroke, and so we had to cancel our trip again. And then I got COVID, which turned into long COVID, and we had to cancel our trip again. And my brother really wanted to join us, but he has a deep fear of flying. And so he wasn't sure he was going to come. But we saw month after month more of these laws being passed all over the country, banning teachers from being able to teach about what happened to our family. And we just felt them, our ancestors, calling us, and we had to go. And finally we bought our tickets in 2023, spring of 2023, and we made it down to the plantation. And my dad actually found a photo. This is the photo of the Lenoir plantation, and that big house was built by my ancestors, my enslaved ancestors, that the white family is on the porch of. And when we got down there, we were able to meet a man who owned that land now, and he took us back to a clearing where he showed us the last headstone that existed of where our ancestors buried each other. And he took us to this burial site, and we held a ceremony there for our enslaved ancestors that included me reading a letter that was uh, our offering to our ancestors. And so um, you can see on this slide, I'm with my dad and my brother there in Morgantown, Mississippi, at the site, at the burial site of our ancestors on the Lenoir plantation. And I start my book in the preface with the letter that I read aloud to my ancestors at this very site. And so I thought I would start today by reading this letter to you all. So I read, "Beloved ancestors, many obstacles have been placed in the way of us returning to the land where you were enslaved, abused, and forced to work to enrich the white Lenoir enslavers. The pandemic, a stroke, a fear of flying, and long COVID delayed our journey here. Before that, the education system withheld any knowledge of where you came from, the cruelty you endured, or the creativity and beautiful resistance you contributed to the world. The system of white supremacy used many tactics to deceive us and prevent our family from making this pilgrimage to where you were held captive and denied manumission. Despite the many obstacles and the plots to hide this place from us and deny us knowledge of this land and your existence here, we have found it. Your family has returned to claim you. We have returned to the forced enslaved labor camp that was politely referred to as the Lenoir plantation. We have returned to the place where you no doubt spent endless hours picking cotton and tobacco with the promise of the lash if you slowed down or refused. We have returned to the site of unspeakable horrors, but we have also returned to the place where you all dared to live. A place where you all had the incredible courage to love, despite knowing that falling in love could inflict a terrible pain when your beloved was sold away or worked to death. We are here. We are at the very place where you found ways to guard your humanity from those who thought it was possible to steal. We are here where you sang together, where you granted forgiveness to a friend who hurt your feelings, dressed the wounds of those who were injured, and held those in need of comfort. We are here to experience a truth deeper than any that can be understood intellectually. We are here to make a promise to you and to this land and to each other. You will not be forgotten. It doesn't matter if they pass laws to make it illegal to speak of you, to teach about you, or to learn about you, because those laws don't govern us. Only truth and love govern us, and so we will pass on the knowledge of this land and your existence here to our posterity and to all we encounter. We send to you our deepest gratitude for gifting us the will to survive and the spirit of resistance that you pass to us through your blood and through your stories. With eternal love, Jesse, Jamana, and Gerald." And so my presentation to you all tonight is not just a political statement. It is a fulfillment of my promise to my ancestors that I wouldn't lie about their experience. And that's exactly what powerful people want us to do right now across the country. It is really breathtaking what's happening with laws across the country. We're in a situation now where almost half of all students in the public schools go to a school in a jurisdiction where there is a law or policy that demands that they lie to students about U.S. history, about Black history, about LGBTQ plus history, about women's history. It is absolutely incredible. The UCLA Center for Critical Race Theory has tracked these bills and has revealed the fact that even before Trump begins defunding schools across the country that teach honestly about race, gender, or sexuality, we already have a situation where nearly half of kids are prevented from learning honest history. And the situation has gotten so absurd. It's gotten so over the top. These laws are so wild that really, I submit to you that only the Onion can properly capture what's happening in the US today. I want you to, did you see this headline? Teacher fired for breaking state's critical race theory law after telling students she's black. Right? It's absurd and it's over the top. Maybe if you're from Seattle, you know Seattle has a similar newspaper as the Onion called The Needling. The Needling had this headline: Florida bans the letters LGBTQ from the alphabet. Right? Now, as absurd as these headlines are, I want to suggest to you that the reality is more absurd. The reality is more breathtaking. Really, I mean that honestly. Let's look at this. This is a real headline. This is not the Onion. Florida will require students to learn that enslaved people, quote, benefited from slavery. This is just beyond imagination. That we are returning to the Confederacy in the 21st century. In Florida, it is a felony, punishable by 5 years in jail if you get caught in the classroom as a teacher with a book that's been banned. That's what I mean when I say the reality is more absurd than the Onion can even conjure. Right? We have a superintendent in Iowa, not the deep South, not the deep red state. In Iowa, a superintendent told a teacher that he should not teach that slavery was wrong, that that was an opinion, and we needed to keep opinions out. Right? In fact, states like California that don't have a ban on teaching the truth still have so many school districts that have passed similar laws to Florida that 110,000 students in California go to a school in a school district that has also had the truth banned. Right? That's the situation that we find ourselves in right now. And that's why we have to speak plainly about the challenge that we are facing today. And that's why I think we need to call these laws exactly what they are: truth crime laws. And that's what I write about in the book, that these laws banning history should be best understood as truth crime laws, laws that prohibit youth from learning the truth. And I suggest in the book that the real problem is not critical race theory, but in fact, the real problem is uncritical race theory, an uncritical examination of race in our society, right? Uncritical race theory, I think, is a term that's important to understand, because when they charge teachers who teach about race with teaching critical race theory, there's a few things that I think we need to respond with. They say that you're imposing your theory of race on the classroom, and instead of imposing your theory of race, you need to stick to the facts, right? Well, what that assumes is that adopting an uncritical acceptance of today's racial hierarchy is not a theory, right? And in fact, they have a highly developed theory of race. It's just they don't want to name that theory. They don't want to show you the underpinnings of their theory of race because that would trace back to unseemly ideas like the eugenics movement that was an open white supremacist ideology, right? And so we need to be able to name that these uncritical race theorists are trying to impose a theory of race on our schools that says there is no such thing as systemic racism. That's their theory, right? And yet we can see that there's a massive wealth gap in this country. We can see that the schools are more segregated today than at any time since 1968. And kids go to segregated schools. They know that there's systemic racism, right? What we have to do is help them understand how that functions and why it functions. And to do that, it requires embracing traditions like ethnic studies, Black studies, and other anti-racist frameworks that can help students understand how our country was founded on the enslavement of African people, the genocide of Native people, the theft of their land, and what the ongoing consequences are for a country that has never fully reckoned with the consequences of uh those crimes. And you know, these uncritical race theorists have been attacking anti-racist teachers uh with such zeal that we are seeing some really uh horrific attacks that this country hasn't seen since the McCarthy era. A friend of mine is a teacher in Wisconsin. You may have heard her story, Melissa Temple. She was a beloved veteran educator, a former editor at the magazine that I helped to edit, Rethinking Schools. And uh, her students were getting ready to sing songs for the school musical. And one of the songs they picked was called Rainbow Land. This is not a radical anthem. This is a pop song by Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton. It doesn't even mention LGBTQ plus people. It just says, wouldn't it be nice to live in a land where we're all accepted and treated equally? And the principal banned the students from singing that song because he believed it violated the school district's policy of their ban on rainbows and rainbow ideology. So my friend Melissa, in her own time on a Friday from home, on her private Twitter account, tweeted out, I think my students should be able to sing this song. When she came to school on Friday, there was a police officer in the office with an HR representative who escorted her out of school, and she never saw her students again. Her students had their first grade teacher ripped out of their classroom, and those relationships were severed. She's fired. She's never returned to the classroom. She has sued them and is trying to fight back, but this is modern day America. This is the modern day McCarthyist witch hunts that are occurring. The modern day lavender scare that's attacking LGBTQ plus folks, right? Um, there are so many stories I could tell you of educators around the country, from Amy Donofrio in Florida, who was the first teacher to be fired for uplifting Black lives in her classroom in a school that was named after Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general who led the slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people in our country to try to maintain slavery, right? In fact, the Washington Post did a study back in 2022 where they found 160 educators who had been fired or pushed out of the classroom for teaching about race, class, or gender or sexuality. And so the attack is very real, but so is the struggle for justice. And I just want to end with a few words about what that struggle looks like before we have a conversation with Julie about some more of the ideas in the book, because the resistance is is really inspiring. And if you all had gotten a chance to interview all the people I did for Teach Truth, interview the students and the parents and the caregivers and community members who are building the Teach Truth movement, you all would have a lot more courage in this moment to know that our side is on the right side of history and is actually gaining strength. Um, one of the teachers that I'm so impressed by is a teacher named Summer in Oklahoma. And when the law passed in Oklahoma, banning honest curriculum, the school district that she taught in told the teachers they needed to either remove all the books from their classroom, every last title, to have them vetted, or they could cover them up in the classroom. So Summer started by following the rules. she took butcher paper and she covered up all the books in her classroom on the shelf with this red butcher paper. And then she wrote with magic marker across the butcher paper, books the state doesn't want you to read. And then, hold up, she didn't stop there. Then she added a QR code onto the butcher paper uh, that's linked to the Brooklyn Public Library that made their full catalog open to any state with banned books. And she wrote by the QR code, definitely don't scan this QR code, right? This is the creative resistance that's happening around the country. I am my day job now is I get to support the Teaching for Black Lives study groups that are forming around the country. And every year we have over 100 study groups with, hundreds of educators who are participating in these, reaching tens of thousands of students around the country. And every month, these educators meet to talk about how they are going to collectively teach Black history and center Blackness in their classroom, sometimes regardless of the law. And oftentimes, these teachers are practicing what Professor Jarvis Givens calls in his brilliant book, fugitive pedagogy, right? And fugitive pedagogy is a tradition that reaches all the way back to 1740, when South Carolina passed the first anti-literacy law in the colonies. And that was a direct reaction to the Stono Rebellion of 1739. In 1739, a man named Jemmy organized a rebellion. He was an enslaved man and he marched from plantation to plantation with a sign that read "Liberty!" exclamation point. Well, when the militia came to put down that uprising, they not only wanted to kill every last one of those rebels, they wanted to murder the ability of Black people to ever write the word liberty or think it again. And so they passed that anti-literacy law. But what I find fascinating is that South Carolina had to pass another anti-literacy law a few years later, and then another one. And why? Because Black people kept defying the law. They kept breaking the law and sneaking off into what they called hush harbors or pit schools and teaching each other to read or write anyway. And that's the tradition that we stand in today. That's the tradition that all of us in the Teach Truth movement are uplifting today. This defiance of unjust laws that are aimed at curbing the power of knowledge and uh, and limiting the power of education. And they fear education. They feared it back when my ancestors were sneaking off plantations, teaching each other to read and write. And they fear education today because they know they saw the 2020 uprising and they saw the largest uprising in US history where it was a mass multiracial uprising led by young black youth. But they saw white, black, Arab, Asian, uh, Latine, and everything else. They saw all of us linking arms in a multiracial uprising to demand an honest account of not only what had happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but what had happened throughout US history. And that uprising scared them, especially when anti-racist books shot to the top of bestseller lists, especially when Merriam-Webster dictionary changed their definition of racism to not just be an interpersonal definition where being a racist is about saying a hurtful word, but they added a systemic entry on racism to describe racism as a systemic and structural issue that has to do with systems of power denying resources to people based on race, right? We shook the foundations of a country that never wanted to look at itself in the mirror, a country that was so afraid of itself that it told itself comforting stories like America was delivered by the stork and didn't want to look any further into the creation of this nation lest it offend delicate sensibilities. And now it's time we tell the truth. It's time we teach the truth. And to get there, we're going to need an even bigger uprising and a more sustained effort. And that's why I'm so happy to be with you all, to have the Zen Education Project be partnering with Red Wine and Blue and other organizations, because this great reckoning is coming. You can't have as many contradictions as we have in our society today and think that the status quo is going to hold. We have a country that claims it's the land of the free and yet there are more people behind bars. There are more black people behind bars on probation or on under the control of the correctional department than were enslaved on plantations in 1850. The United States total prison population is more than any nation in the history of the world. We're talking about the Roman Empire didn't repress and imprison people at the rate that we do. You can take all of Europe and China's prison population and combine them, and they still haven't reached what the land of the free does. We have to be able to talk about these contradictions. We have to be able to teach about these contradictions if we ever want to build a society really based on freedom and democracy, right? And that's why we have to be in this struggle together. They know that anti-racist educators aren't shaming white kids. That's their claim, right? They claim that what we're doing is about shaming white kids, and that's why they have to protect white families from anti-racist educators or social justice educators. But that's not what they really fear. What they really fear is that we're empowering white kids with the history of people like John Brown, who fought against slavery, or the Grimke sisters, abolitionists, white abolitionists that fought against slavery. They're scared that we're empowering white kids with the knowledge of who Howard Zinn was, not just the people's historian, but an organizer and activist who was part of the civil rights movement, right? And that is the history that we want to reclaim and ensure that our young people get to learn today so they can build a new great multiracial uprising for truth and justice. So thanks for having me. And I would love to continue the conversation with you, Julie.
Well, you literally just answered the question that I was going to ask you. So, but it was a good segue. That's fine.
Right on.
So we know historically, right, there has been an effort to deny education to Black people in this country, whether it's slavery, whether it's Jim Crow. So can you've talked and touched on this a little bit, but can you kind of explain the parallels you see between historical efforts to ban education and then the current trends that we're seeing? And I guess
Yeah.
just answer the question, and you kind of just did a little bit, but like, why? Like, what are they really afraid is
Mm.
going to happen if we have anti-racist education?
Yes. Thank you for that question because I just barely touched the surface and I'm really glad that you asked that because we have to really understand what their goals are with banning honest education if we're going to be able to stop their plan. So the first thing I want to say is where what their playbook is and where they're drawing inspiration. And once we have read their playbook, then we'll know how to stop them. Okay. So their playbook is the McCarthy era attack on educators and broadly on social movements. Okay. So in the late 40s and early 50s, the McCarthy era ushered in the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare. And under the Red Scare, all you had to do is label someone a communist and they would be fired from their job. And this was especially targeted towards educators. And, just the way today, all you have to do is label someone a critical race theorist or a DEI uh, specialist, and then you can get them fired. And thousands of teachers were fired in the US, all across the country, having been accused of being a communist. Over 400 in New York City alone were fired in the late 40s, early 50s. And some people know about the history of the Red Scare and how intense that was on college campuses and K-12 schools, but most people aren't aware of the corresponding Lavender Scare. And actually, more federal employees were fired for uh, being under suspicion of being homosexual than even those being under suspicion of being communists. And in Florida, in the late 50s, they started the Johns Committee, which was a committee that was first set up to interrogate people, mostly educators, under suspicion of being communist because they wanted to sever any connection between teachers and the NAACP and other civil rights organizations by labeling anybody who did anti-racist work as a communist. But that organization, the Johns Committee, quickly switched from an anti-communist witch hunt to an attack on LGBTQ plus people. And they began bringing before them every single one of the female single teachers. So if you were single female teaching in the schools, you were under suspicion of being lesbian and you were brought before an all male panel that often included police officers and had your personal life interrogated. And hundreds of those teachers were fired in Florida. That's the playbook that they're drawing from when they pass the don't say gay, don't say trans laws around this country, right? And and I say that we have to know what their playbook is if we want to be able to defeat them, right? And when I say that, what I mean is that how did the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare, how did this McCarthy era come to an end? Well, when we study history, we understand that it wasn't some one great savior. It wasn't a brilliant politician or some person with power or money that said this is out of our minds. We are attacking each other and tearing apart society. What ended the McCarthy era was the civil rights movement. It was the masses of Black people and their allies who lost their fear, who were no longer willing to cower on and after being called communist, and they were willing to fill the jail cells up. They were willing to risk their lives in freedom rides, in lunch counter sit-ins, starting freedom schools. And when they no longer were scared of being called communist and being put on a list where they could lose their job, and they were willing to fight in collective struggle, they swept aside the hysteria and the paranoia of the Red Scare and the Lavender Scare. And so I think that's really the context that we need to have to understand the attack today. And I might just add one other thing, which is that when you hear about the attack on education today in the mainstream media, they limit the conversation to GOP strategy for getting out the vote. And it's true that the GOP uses the attack on critical race theory as a way to get out the vote, right? But that's only one aspect of the attack. There's a deeper motive at play here. They also want to use the attack on anti-racist education to privatize our schools, right? If they can convince white families that anti-racist teaching is about shaming white kids, then they can drive them out of the public schools and convince them that they need to embrace the privatized charter or voucher school schemes, right? And so it's tied to privatization. And then lastly, I think there's an even deeper impetus for these truth crime laws, one that never gets discussed in the mainstream. And that really is an idea that was developed by a sociologist named Boaventura de Sousa Santos. And he developed this term called epistemicide. An epistemicide is the destruction of ways of knowing, of knowledge, of systems of thought. The epistemicide occurred during colonization when the Spanish conquistadors took every last Mayan text, every book that the Mayans had produced, and lit them on fire in a giant bonfire. And the Mayans were the most advanced scientific society with regard to astronomy. They had one of the most advanced architectural societies in the world, and all of their insights went up in flames. Well, today, the uncritical race theorists want to annihilate whole systems of thought that can help young people understand what racism is, where it came from, and how to fight it.
Okay, let me ask you this. You touched on the teacher friend with the brown paper across and the QR code, which is great. And you're talking a lot about rising up, and we have to, this is how the civil rights movement, stop the McCarthyism. So, what advice or suggestions do you have, number one, and for teachers who are facing this? And then how do we, all of us on this call tonight, support those teachers and make a difference in this fight?
Yes. Thank you for that. I mean, that's the crucial question, because if we're not talking about what to do about it, then this is all an intellectual exercise, right? And so actually I want to can I show a slide real quick?
Sure.
Um, because I want to show what the resistance can look like. Um,
You bring up your slide. I'm going to bring Julie up too, because I know if there's some questions, and we'll get into that once you're done with your slide.
okay, cool. Um, yeah, I'll just show a quick slide that shows what the resistance can look like. So we have the Teach Truth Day of Action. And this year, June 7th, is the 5th annual Teach Truth Day of Action. And it's the best way to show how powerful our movement is, how many of us there are in this, to reclaim the narrative in the media. They keep running the story after story about Trump's attacks on education. Okay. But they're not covering all of the study groups that I work with every day who are resisting those attacks. They're not covering the communities that are fighting back. And we have to force that story into the mainstream. And this is one of the most powerful ways we have to do it. These photos are from last year's Teach Truth Day of Action, communities all over the country have organized such creative forms of resistance, not just your average rallies and speakouts, but at these uh, days of action, people have organized historical walking tours. So there was a group in Memphis that showed that the school that their very school sat on a slave auction site, and they walked around to the various slave auction sites and taught the history that was being banned by the law that had passed recently. Um, there has been here in Seattle, we did a historical walking tour where we went to the free health clinic that was right by my high school that was started by the Black Panther Party. And we talked about how if these laws passed in our state, we wouldn't be able to teach about where our kids get medical treatment from right down the street because it relates to the struggle against systemic racism, right? So this is um, the movement to teach truth. And this year, we've actually made it even easier to participate in the Day of Action. So I just want to let people know how easy it is before I turn it back to you. The Zen Education Project has created several ways for you to participate. And if you sign up, we'll send you a banned book tabling kit. So you get banned books, and then you get a laminated card that um, describes why that book was banned and where it was banned and what students miss when they don't get to read that book or see themselves reflected in their literature, right? And then we have buttons that say, teach the truth or teach banned history or read banned books. And this year we have a lesson plan. You can do a mini lesson with the group that assembles, where we have quotes about the struggle for education throughout history, and you can do a gallery walk where everyone at your rally walks around the room or walks around people holding the quotes and leaves their reaction to the quotes, how these quotes from history are relate to today. And we have a timeline that shows some of the history I just touched on in my talk about the struggle for Black education, the first anti-literacy laws, and then the struggle against those literacy laws, the Black people starting schools during Reconstruction, and then the Ku Klux Klan burning those schools down during Reconstruction, and then all the way up to today's anti-literacy laws. Um, we have a timeline that you can pass out to folks and show them the power of this movement. All right.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yes, Red, White, and Blue is a big supporter of Teach Truth Day of Action. So please check that out. Do something in your community. There are so many ways we can use our voices and stand up. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie because I know there were questions.
Yeah, the first one that came across was, does your book come in an audiobook?
Oh, they're working on it, but it's not out yet. It'll be a little while. So you might want to get the hard copy first, but I'm excited. Eventually we're gonna get out that audiobook.
And then someone asked about this recording, and it will be on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. So give it a few days and it'll be there. Julie sends out information and links and all when this is over. Well, next day.
And
Um,
I'll just say quickly that I hope that if folks do order my book and read it, I would love to hear from you what new insights you gained, what I missed. It really helps us build the movement to hear what parts of the book we should be sharing more with communities and what we need to add in our analysis.
so you already said what people can do, but what's an action that somebody could do tomorrow?
Oh, I love that. Well, depending on who you are, right? So, educators every day are practicing fugitive pedagogy. So, if you're an educator, go teach the truth in your classroom, right? That is the simple first step you can take. Um, but we educators, in order to do that, they need to know that everyone else has their back, right? And so we have to begin to develop collective approaches to making our resistance visible. So there's several ways. Finding tomorrow or even tonight, look up when your next school board meeting is, right? You can sign up to testify at your school board meetings, and you can raise some of the points that I made in the talk today about how many communities are facing these truth crime laws. And, in Chicago, the Chicago Teachers Union just negotiated a contract where they enshrined in the contract uh, the mandate to teach about race, gender, and sexuality, so that even if the federal government threatens the schools, it is in their contract that they have to teach these things, right? And so we need every school district to pass similar laws and policies and enshrine in their contract the need to teach honestly, to have academic freedom of teachers, to teach the truth about U.S. history. And so going to your school board meetings and demanding that what happened in Chicago spread to your community is crucial. And if the school board members don't want to support that, then you need to think about running for school board yourself, right? And uh, you can't do that alone. So you can start a study group. Tomorrow you could start a study group on Teach Truth. You can reach out to your friends and your neighbors, your colleagues and coworkers, and you can say, "Did you know that almost half of all students in the U.S. go to a school where their teacher has to lie to them? What's happening to our country? What are we going to do about that?" Do you want to join me in a study group to learn about the history of how these kind of laws have been implemented throughout U.S. history, and to look and to learn about what teachers and communities are doing around the country to resist? Join me in that study group. And then out of the study group, you might identify someone who wants to run for school board, or people that want to support you to run for school board, or people that want to help you organize for the Teach Truth Day of Action in your community. So tomorrow you could start that study group. You could contact the Zen Education Project and order your banned book kit and get ready to serve your community some truth.
I saw that there's some folks from Zen in the chat. If they could put the link in, someone asked for the link to the Zen project. So if we could
Oh,
do
yeah.
that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I see a few of my colleagues here dropping links. Josh dropped a link to
Mhm.
a lesson plan that I just released for teachers, but you could use it in the community too, that teaches the history of all the laws that have been aimed at suppressing education. And I couldn't believe how many laws I found throughout US history that mirror the ones we're seeing today. And you'll be surprised by how many laws there are when you find that.
I was always taught there's nothing new under the sun.
Mm,
And then someone asked about how to find these June 7th events in their area. Is there like
yes.
a map like we kind of have with our Trouble Nation that you guys have?
We absolutely do have a map, and we just joined our map with the group called Heal Together. And Heal Together is great. If you're not an educator, if you're a parent, caregiver, community member, Heal Together has some great workshops and ways to get involved in this as well. And so we have a map with them that shows where the Teach Truth actions are already being organized. So you can see, oh, there's already one in my city. I'm just going to join that one. Or, oh, there is not one in my city. I better get started organizing. And some cities have multiple events. And because you can also do them, June 7th is the day we're targeting, but you can do series of events as well throughout the month of June, even in the run up to June. People are doing them um, all throughout the weeks and months ahead. And my colleagues will drop a link to the the Teach Truth Day of Action plans, and you can check all that out at the Zen Education Project. And if you go to the Zen Education Project and you click on the button that says campaigns, and then you scroll down to the Teach Truth campaign, you will get a lot of information about Teach Truth. There's a petition there that educators can sign to pledge to teach the truth. And we have a Teach Truth syllabus that has all these lesson plans. You can bring those lesson plans to a teacher near you and say, have you seen the Teach Truth syllabus? These are lessons to address the things that are often being banned and excluded from classrooms, right?
Are those for all grades?
So middle school and high school.
Middle school and high school.
Are
Okay, because
mostly.
someone asked about the primary grades and
Yeah, we don't focus on that, but we do have, I am working with an educator right now who is beginning the process of translating a lot of our lessons to the earlier grades. So eventually we will have that. We need more funding to get there.
well, I'm going to kick this back over to Julie. Thank you, Jesse. As always, very, very informative. Thank you so
So
much.
good to be with you, Julie.
All right. Well, Julie already thanked Jesse, but thank you for coming. As you heard from Jesse, the way we do this is we get together, we use our voices, we rise up, we say no, we talk, we help support our teachers, we go to our school board meetings, and you do that by organizing locally. So if you want to do that anti-racist book club, maybe to educate people, you want to do those historical tours, do it on June 7th, but you can also do them all year long. We have lots of Trouble Nation groups that are really successful at doing things like walking tours to educate people, doing book clubs just to get people understanding, anti-racist education or why books are being banned in this country. So anyways, Trouble Nation is our program to help you with local organizing. So if you want to start a group, we would be happy to support you no matter where you live. And the more voices we have doing this work, the better we are going to be and the stronger we are going to be. So thank you for Jesse for your time and your presentation. As always, thank you, Julie, for going through that chat and pulling out those questions. Everybody have a great evening.
With you all. Take care.